Welcome, and thank you for joining me tonight. As we settle in, we'll drift back to the dawn of the new millennium, to a handheld adventure that carried players into the heart of Johto. Let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from, and if you'd like to explore more journeys like this, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next adventure. For many, it was the first time they saw their companions truly come alive through animation, or the first time a story leaned heavily on a single legendary. Pokémon Crystal was more than just an enhanced version of the second generation. It was a quiet refinement, a shimmering variation that introduced features destined to shape the series for years. Tonight, we'll uncover the details and trivia of this game, a collection of facts that together create a gentle rhythm to guide you toward rest. From the moment it appeared on shelves in the year 2001, Crystal set itself apart. While Gold and Silver had already expanded the Pokémon world into a lush new region filled with color and depth, Crystal refined the formula further. One of the most striking additions was the introduction of animated sprites. For the first time, when a battle began, your partner would give a small movement, a flutter of wings, a tilt of the head, or a sudden shake. These simple flourishes brought life to the creatures in ways still remembered fondly by players who watched their companions twitch and sway before combat began. The animations were short and limited, but they represented a step forward, showing that Pokémon were not static images, but living beings with personality. Another defining aspect of Crystal was its expanded focus on Suicune. In Gold and Silver, the legendary beasts wandered the map as roaming encounters, slipping away before most players could even weaken them. Crystal elevated one of them to narrative centerpiece. Suicune's presence became a recurring thread, tied closely to the character of Suicune, a devoted seeker determined to find and understand the graceful legendary. Throughout the journey, players would see Suicune at key moments, watching silently before dashing away. These encounters created a sense of pursuit and destiny, culminating in a memorable battle at the Tin Tower. For many players, this was the first time a mainline game had given one legendary creature such a central role, paving the way for later titles where stories would revolve around mythic beings. Another feature introduced in Crystal was the ability to play as a female protagonist. For the first time, players could choose between a boy or a girl at the beginning of their journey. This addition seems small now, but it was groundbreaking at the time. Girls who had always played the series suddenly saw themselves represented directly on screen, and the franchise gained a more universal appeal. The female trainer, later known as Chris, wore distinctive blue hair and sporty clothing, setting her apart from the later redesigns in Heart Gold and Soul Silver. To this day, Chris remains a beloved character for her role in broadening representation within the Pokémon world. Crystal also refined connectivity. Through the use of the mobile system GB, a feature available in Japan, players could connect their Game Boys via cell phones to battle, trade, and even access online events. Though this technology was limited outside Japan, it foreshadowed the global connections that would later define the series. One particularly fascinating feature tied to this system was the Battle Tower, a place where players could fight through a series of challenging opponents. It was the first version of a facility that would later evolve into staples like the Battle Frontier and Battle Subway, laying the foundation for advanced post-game challenges. The soundtrack of Crystal deserves its own attention. While most tracks remained consistent with Gold and Silver, subtle refinements made the music feel richer. The legendary beast themes were adjusted slightly to emphasize their importance, and the new Battle Tower carried its own tune that felt futuristic and distinct. Listening back today, the Crystal arrangements carry nostalgia not only for their melodies, but for their place in bridging the gap between the 8-bit and more advanced sounds that would come with the Game Boy Advance. Graphically, Crystal took advantage of the Game Boy Color's abilities more fully than its predecessors. Shimmering effects, brighter palettes, and small flourishes like Suicune's flowing mane in battle gave the game a sense of polish. Even small environmental effects, such as water appearing more vibrant or the gentle glow of special areas, added to the experience. Compared to the muted tones of red and blue, the Johto region sparkled with life, and Crystal pushed that vibrancy even further. Hidden within Crystal are small changes to encounter rates and availability. For instance, certain Pokémon were easier to find in Crystal than in Gold or Silver, subtly rebalancing the regional experience. Some species swapped locations, making familiar routes feel fresh even for players who had already mastered the previous versions. This decision encouraged exploration and gave Crystal its own identity rather than being seen as a simple reissue. One curious detail lies in the localization. In Japan, Crystal included features that never made it overseas, such as special mobile events tied to the mobile system GB. Players could receive rare items, participate in tournaments, and even unlock Celebi through official distributions. Outside Japan, Celebi remained locked away, obtainable only through special events that were few and far between. This regional divide created a sense of mystery, as international fans heard rumors of features they could never fully access. The legacy of this divide lingers, as fans still look back on Japanese exclusive features with curiosity. Even the Pokédex carried updates. Entries for many Pokémon were revised slightly in Crystal, giving them additional flavor or lore. For example, Suicune's Pokédex entries emphasized its purity and ability to cleanse water, deepening its mythic aura. These small textual changes may seem minor, but they added to the richness of the world, showing how even short lines of text could shape perception. Crystal also expanded the role of the unknown. In Gold and Silver, they were already mysterious, tied to the ruins of Alph with their cryptic alphabet shapes. In Crystal, solving the puzzles unlocked animated sequences that deepened the sense of mystery. These cutscenes gave the impression of ancient forces stirring, enhancing the eerie atmosphere of the ruins. It was a subtle change, but it gave the unknown a stronger place in the lore, reinforcing the sense that Johto was a land steeped in ancient traditions and secrets. Beyond story and lore, Crystal carried mechanical adjustments. Movesets for certain Pokémon were updated, making them more competitive or more thematically consistent. Small tweaks to level up moves ensured that some species gained access to abilities that better fit their roles. These balancing choices helped refine the competitive scene, though at the time, few players outside dedicated communities would have noticed. They reflect how Game Freak used Crystal as a testing ground for adjustments that would influence later generations. For players who reached the postgame, Crystal offered subtle but meaningful differences. The Battle Tower, while limited in its international release, represented a new philosophy, the idea that Pokémon could be tested endlessly in structured formats, pushing strategy beyond the main story. This concept would expand in later generations, but Crystal was the seed. For those who played it, the challenge of climbing through increasingly tough opponents created a thrill unlike the standard gyms and Elite Four. It hinted at the future of Pokémon as not only an adventure, but a competitive discipline. Another small yet significant change was the addition of new phone call events. Trainers who exchanged numbers with the player could now offer rematches more frequently or provide small gifts. This expanded on Gold and Silver's feature, making the world feel more alive. NPCs remembered you, reached out, and created the illusion of relationships within the game. For children experiencing Crystal at the time, this mechanic reinforced the feeling that Johto was not static, but filled with characters who lived beyond the player's immediate view. Perhaps one of the most memorable quirks of Crystal was the odd egg distributed early in the game. While Gold and Silver introduced the daycare breeding mechanic, Crystal leaned into the theme by giving players an egg that would eventually hatch into a baby Pokémon. This gesture ensured that every player experienced the joy of hatching, reinforcing the theme of growth and continuity that defined the Johto region. In countless small ways, Crystal sparkled differently than its predecessors. Its story leaned into myth, its features hinted at the future, and its refinements polished what was already one of the most beloved generations. For fans who played it at the time, it became a treasured memory, not just an alternate version, but a journey that felt personal and alive. Crystal also introduced small but meaningful refinements to the way players experienced Johto's world. One of the most noticeable was how trainers you encountered throughout the region felt more dynamic than ever before. While Gold and Silver had already experimented with trainers calling for rematches, Crystal expanded on this by allowing a wider variety of phone calls and encounters. Some trainers would call not only to challenge you again, but to share information about swarms of particular species appearing in certain areas. This mechanic created the sense that the world was alive, changing from day to day, and that trainers were part of a network rather than isolated battles along the way. The pacing of the story in Crystal was also subtly adjusted. While the core plot of traveling through Johto, challenging gyms, and eventually venturing into Kanto remained, the deliberate inclusion of Suicune created a thread that made the region feel connected in new ways. You would encounter the legendary at different points, often in scenic locations, which emphasized its roaming nature. These repeated encounters built anticipation until the climactic battle at the Tin Tower, transforming what had once been a random chance to stumble upon a legendary into a carefully orchestrated narrative arc. The presentation of the legendary beasts themselves was more vivid. In Gold and Silver, their sprites were static, and their appearances were defined by brief encounters. In Crystal, the cutscenes that introduced them added layers of atmosphere, accompanied by music that conveyed both mystery and grandeur. For many players, this was one of the earliest times that a Pokémon game felt cinematic, showing that handheld experiences could carry moments of spectacle alongside quiet exploration. Crystal also marked an early experiment with accessibility. The option to choose a female protagonist was not just cosmetic, it changed how NPCs addressed the player, altering pronouns and, in some cases, even dialogue. Though the differences were minor, they mattered greatly to players who wanted to see themselves reflected more directly in the game. Chris, as she would later be named, became a symbol of progress for the series, a sign that the world of Pokémon was meant to include everyone. Her design, with her striking blue hair and distinctive outfit, became instantly recognizable, and she remains an icon for fans who first discovered representation through her presence. In terms of mechanics, Crystal tweaked a number of learn sets and evolutions, smoothing out rough edges from Gold and Silver. For example, some species gained access to moves earlier, making them more usable during the main story. These adjustments were subtle, but improved the pacing of team development. At the time, Most players may not have consciously noticed the differences, but the result was a smoother journey that encouraged experimentation with a wider variety of companions. Crystal also quietly expanded the lore of the region. In the ruins of Alph, solving puzzles triggered short animated sequences that made the unknown feel far more mysterious than before. The sequences implied ancient powers stirring, hinting that the ruins were not just puzzles, but remnants of a forgotten civilization. For many players, these moments were among the eeriest in the game, with the strange music and cryptic symbols creating an atmosphere unlike anything else in Johto. The decision to highlight Unknown in this way gave them a place in the broader mythology of the region, foreshadowing how later generations would continue to use ancient ruins as storytelling devices. Another important addition was the Battle Tower, which appeared on Route 40. While relatively simple compared to the massive battle frontiers of later games, it represented a major step forward. It offered structured challenges beyond the Elite Four, allowing players to test their strategies against a series of increasingly difficult trainers. For those who wanted to push their skills further, this facility provided endless replay value. It was one of the first signs that the developers were beginning to see competitive battling not as a side activity, but as an essential part of the Pokémon experience. Japan received even more from Crystal than international players. The mobile system GB allowed access to features that seemed revolutionary at the time. By connecting through mobile phones, players could trade, battle, and even participate in special events remotely. One such event gave access to Celebi, making it one of the earliest examples of a mythical Pokémon tied to distribution technology. While these features never reached the global release, they gave Japanese players a glimpse of what would one day become commonplace through Wi-Fi and online connectivity. International fans, hearing about these mysteries from across the ocean, could only imagine what it would have been like to explore these events, fueling curiosity that has lasted for decades. The soundtrack of Crystal deserves a closer look as well. While much of it echoed gold and silver, the developers used the opportunity to refine melodies and experiment with new flourishes. The theme for the Battle Tower, for instance, carried a futuristic energy that stood out from the more traditional compositions of Johto. Listening closely, you can hear how the composers layered tones to push the Game Boy Color hardware to its limits, creating tunes that felt richer than what had been possible just a few years before. These subtle improvements helped make Crystal feel like a polished and complete version of the Johto experience. Even the visuals carried layers of trivia. The opening sequence, which prominently featured Suicune dashing across the screen, was a striking departure from the static introductions of earlier games. It immediately set the tone, telling players that this version was different, more alive, and more ambitious. The use of color, with Suicune's flowing mane highlighted against contrasting backgrounds, demonstrated how far the hardware had come since the grayscale days of Red and Blue. Players who turned on their cartridges for the first time were greeted with a sense of wonder that set Crystal apart from anything before it. Pokémon distribution within the game also shifted slightly. Certain species were given new locations, encouraging players to explore areas they might have ignored in Gold and Silver. This reshuffling gave the adventure a fresh feel, ensuring that Crystal was not simply a retread, but a distinct journey. For completionists, these small differences provided motivation to comb through the world again, reinforcing the idea that each version carried its own identity and secrets. Even small items and features carried significance. The odd egg, given to players early in the game, would hatch into one of several baby Pokémon. Each had a chance of being shiny, making it one of the earliest and most reliable ways to encounter a shiny without grinding for thousands of encounters. This design decision ensured that many players experienced the thrill of hatching a rare, alternate colored companion, cementing Crystal as a game that quietly encouraged curiosity and patience. The expansion of lore tied to Suicune also revealed itself in the Pokédex. Its entries emphasized not only its power, but its role as a purifier of water, connecting it to themes of nature and restoration. By focusing on Suicune, rather than equally distributing attention among all three beasts, the developers crafted a more focused story. The decision to spotlight one legendary so heavily foreshadowed later generations, where cover legendaries would become the focal point of marketing, storytelling, and mechanics. Crystal also contained some subtle coding quirks. For instance, small differences in encounter rates or mechanics led to slight shifts in competitive balance. While the general public may not have noticed, dedicated fans who studied the inner workings of the game uncovered these secrets over time. These discoveries added depth to the community's understanding and created conversations that extended far beyond the cartridge itself. In countless small ways, Crystal was both a refinement and an experiment. It polished Johto's world while testing ideas that would later become staples of the series. For players who experienced it, Crystal felt both familiar and fresh, a shimmering variation that added layers of magic to an already beloved generation. Crystal's significance also rests on the way it deepened the sense of Johto as a region rooted in history and legend. The presence of towers in Ecruteak exemplifies this. The Burned Tower and the Tin Tower were more than just locations. They embodied the themes of destruction and renewal, echoing the myths of the legendary beasts said to have perished in the flames before being resurrected. In Crystal, these places were not just backdrops, but central to the unfolding narrative of Suicune, drawing players into stories that felt timeless. The addition of short cutscenes, when the beasts were released from the basement, gave the moment weight, ensuring it remained one of the most memorable sequences of the generation. The ruins of Alph expanded this sense of ancient mystery. By solving sliding puzzles that depicted familiar species, players triggered eerie sequences that tied directly to the appearance of the unknown. The game presented these events with a haunting soundtrack, emphasizing the otherworldly nature of the symbols. The fact that the unknown formed an alphabet added a layer of intrigue, encouraging fans to decode messages and speculate about their origins. Crystal leaned into this more heavily than its predecessors, providing just enough hints to stir curiosity while leaving much unexplained. This deliberate ambiguity kept the ruins alive in players' imaginations long after they left them behind. Another subtle but meaningful change was the way the Pokédex presented entries. While Gold and Silver had established the base descriptions, Crystal added small expansions, refining lore and offering additional insights. These entries often emphasized traits that tied into themes of purity, tradition, or mystery, deepening the sense that Johto was a land with cultural roots stretching back far into the past. For young players reading these lines, the Pokédex acted as a window into a living mythology, transforming simple creatures into symbols of a world with depth and history. The Battle Tower, though modest compared to later facilities, deserves a closer look. Located on the seaside route between Olivine and Cianwood, it invited players to test themselves against trainers in a series of consecutive battles. The opponents used more sophisticated teams than the average trainer, and the rules prevented the use of certain legendaries, creating an early framework for competitive structure. While the tower might have seemed intimidating to casual players, for others, it was a place of endless experimentation. It foreshadowed the intricate battle facilities that would become a hallmark of future generations, from the battle frontier in Hoenn to the various towers and subways in Sinnoh and beyond. Crystal's influence extended beyond mechanics and into presentation. The opening sequence, featuring Suicune sprinting across the screen, was a statement of identity. Previous games had simple intros, often focusing on the player or a selection of species. Crystal's cinematic flair made it clear that this was a story with a central figure. Watching the graceful legendary leap across landscapes gave the game a sense of grandeur from the very first moment, setting it apart from its predecessors. Another unique feature tied to the Japanese release was the mobile connectivity. While players outside Japan never experienced it, those who did had access to services that feel surprisingly modern in hindsight. They could trade creatures, battle opponents, and even receive special news updates through their phones. Events distributed through this system gave Japanese players rare opportunities, such as acquiring Celebi. This approach anticipated the global online services that would later define the series, proving that Pokémon had always been looking ahead toward a more connected future. For international fans, the existence of these features created a sense of longing and fascination, as whispers of what Japanese players experienced spread through magazines and early internet forums. The Odd Egg event also carried fascinating details. Given by an in-game character, it had a high chance of hatching into a shiny variant of a baby species. This was one of the earliest deliberate methods of introducing players to the concept of shiny Pokémon outside of the fixed encounter with the red Gyarados. By increasing the odds dramatically, the developers ensured that many players would hatch a brightly colored companion, creating a sense of wonder that might have otherwise remained out of reach. For children who stumbled upon this surprise, the memory of seeing a unique sparkle as their egg hatched remains unforgettable. Crystal refined smaller systems too. Some wild encounters were adjusted, shifting the availability of certain species and subtly altering the flow of exploration. Trainers' teams were modified to provide more challenge or variety, ensuring that familiar battles did not feel identical to gold and silver. These refinements may not have been obvious to every player, but together they created a smoother and more polished journey through Johto. Chris, the female protagonist, deserves further reflection. Her presence was more than symbolic. She represented a deliberate effort to open the world of Pokémon to an even broader audience. For many girls, seeing themselves represented directly within the game created a stronger bond with the adventure. Her design, with distinctive blue hair tied into pigtails and a bold red outfit, stood out compared to the plainer designs of earlier protagonists. Although she was later redesigned in Heart Gold and Soul Silver, Chris remains a nostalgic figure tied closely to Crystal's identity. Even the smaller aesthetic flourishes in Crystal carried meaning. When you entered battle, your Pokemon's brief animation gave the sense that it was alive, brimming with energy. For players who had grown used to static sprites, these little movements were enchanting. They demonstrated how much difference a small detail could make in deepening immersion. These animations may have been brief and simple, but they laid the groundwork for the dynamic models that would later define the series in 3 dimensions. The role of Suicune also deserves more attention. As a character, he was one of the earliest examples of someone whose story intertwined with a legendary Pokémon in a deeply personal way. His obsession with Suicune made him more than just another NPC. He embodied the human side of myth, representing belief, dedication, and even obsession. Characters like him added richness to the story, showing that humans in the Pokemon world were not just trainers or gym leaders, but individuals shaped by legends. His presence made Johto feel more lived in, more complex, and more reflective of how myths can influence culture. Crystal also contributed to the growing idea of Pokemon as more than a solitary adventure. By expanding the phone call system, the battle tower, and the concept of rematches, it emphasized the idea that the world was dynamic and filled with recurring relationships. The sense that trainers remembered you, sought you out, and grew alongside you added a layer of realism. It transformed Johto from a collection of routes and towns into a community of characters whose lives intertwined with your own journey. For many players, Crystal became the definitive version of Johto. Its refinements to story, mechanics, and presentation gave it a completeness that Gold and Silver, while groundbreaking, had not fully achieved. To this day, fans look back on it as the shining capstone of the second generation, a game that preserved the magic of its predecessors while offering glimpses of the future. Crystal's role in shaping Johto's legacy becomes clearer the deeper you look at its quiet adjustments. One subtle but important change was how gym leaders were presented. While their core teams remained familiar, their strategies were tuned in small ways to make battles feel distinct from Gold and Silver. Movesets were slightly adjusted, levels balanced, and the pacing of encounters refined. These changes gave players the sense that even if they had mastered Johto before, this was a new challenge with fresh surprises. For children encountering these leaders for the first time, the difficulty felt carefully calibrated, while returning players found themselves engaged by the nuances. The game also redefined how legendary encounters felt. Instead of purely random chance, Suicune's appearances created anticipation that unfolded across the journey. Seeing the creature dash across the landscape or appear in scenic locations gave it a sense of narrative weight that earlier legendaries lacked. It was no longer simply a hidden prize for those who explored deeply. It was part of the story, woven into the journey itself. This narrative thread elevated the role of legends within Pokemon games, setting the stage for later generations where entire plots would hinge on mythic beings. The inclusion of animated sprites was another subtle but powerful innovation. Even though the movements were minimal, they brought Pokemon to life in ways that static images never could. Watching a bird flap its wings or a creature lean forward gave battles personality and depth. These small animations sparked imaginations, suggesting what the full movement of these creatures might look like. In hindsight, these animations were an early step toward the dynamic battle systems that would later define the series, but in their time, they were magical flourishes that made the world feel more alive. The Odd Egg event carried a sense of delight that extended beyond its immediate purpose. The high chance of hatching a shiny made it one of the most reliable ways for players to experience the thrill of discovering an alternate colored companion. For many, this was their very first shiny, a sparkling surprise that felt like a reward for patience. The memory of watching an egg crack open and reveal a baby Pokemon shimmering with unusual colors remains one of the most cherished details of Crystal. This small event reinforced the themes of growth and surprise that defined Johto as a region. The expanded role of Unknown in Crystal highlighted another layer of mystery. Their alphabet shapes and cryptic behavior encouraged fans to speculate endlessly. Were they remnants of an ancient civilization? Were they connected to legendary powers? The puzzles of the ruins of Alph, now punctuated with eerie animations, gave the impression of forces just out of reach. This deliberate ambiguity fostered imagination, ensuring that the ruins remained one of the most haunting and memorable locations in the series. Players who solved the puzzles felt a sense of accomplishment, but the lingering questions were even more powerful, ensuring that the unknown's mystery endured. Crystal also leaned into the theme of history and legend by enriching the stories tied to Ecruteak City. The towers stood as physical reminders of the past, with their myths woven into the identity of the region. The resurrection of the legendary beasts from the ashes connected the present to a moment of devastation and renewal. In Crystal, Suicune's prominence within this legend was highlighted, making the myth feel less like background lore and more like an integral part of the adventure. These choices gave Johto a cultural depth that resonated with players, creating the sense that they were exploring not just a landscape, but a world layered with history. Even minor details reinforced this sense of richness. Trainers encountered on routes or in caves had their dialogues slightly refined, making them feel more human. Their remarks about the world hinted at lives beyond battling, from casual observations to small pieces of advice. These lines, while easy to overlook, contributed to the illusion that Johto was inhabited by people with stories of their own. The phone call system built on this further, allowing trainers to reach out after their battles, seeking rematches or offering insights. These touches made the region feel alive in ways that static encounters could never achieve. The soundtrack of Crystal deserves attention not just for its refinements, but for the way it framed key moments. The music tied to Suicune emphasized mystery and grace, underscoring the legendary's role as a guardian of purity. The tunes in the ruins of Alph heightened unease, while the Battle Tower's theme hinted at futuristic ambition. These compositions gave Crystal a sonic identity distinct from gold and silver, ensuring that it stood out as more than a simple re-release. For players revisiting the game after years, the music remains one of the most powerful triggers of memory, carrying them back instantly to long nights spent exploring Johto's landscapes. Crystal also offered its players a glimpse of the future through its use of the mobile system GB in Japan. The ability to trade, battle, and even receive news updates through mobile phones was astonishing for its time. Though international players missed out on these features, their very existence signaled the direction the series would take. Online connectivity would eventually become a cornerstone of Pokémon, and Crystal served as one of the earliest experiments. For those who read about these features in magazines or online communities, the mystique surrounding them only deepened the aura of the game. The addition of Suicune tied directly into this sense of myth and narrative focus. His dedication to Suicune reflected a human side of obsession and wonder. He was not a typical trainer or rival, but a seeker, a believer whose pursuit of the legendary gave him depth and individuality. Characters like him expanded the emotional range of the series, showing that not all relationships with Pokémon were defined by competition. Some were defined by reverence, longing, and belief. His presence in Crystal added a layer of humanity that enriched the story. Even the presentation of small mechanics carried significance. Adjustments to wild encounters, tweaks to move availability, and changes to trainer teams may not have been obvious to casual players, but they created a smoother experience overall. These refinements demonstrated how much care was taken to polish the world of Johto. For fans who compared versions closely, these differences gave Crystal its own personality, proving that it was more than a simple repetition of gold and silver. Taken together, all these changes painted Crystal as a game of refinement and quiet innovation. It preserved the magic of Johto while adding layers of mystery, personality, and polish. For those who experienced it, the game remains a treasured memory, a shimmering variation that deepened the enchantment of the second generation. One of the quieter strengths of Pokémon Crystal was how it brought together elements of both myth and modernity, blending ancient legends with technological experiments. The mobile system GB in Japan made the game feel futuristic, offering a level of connectivity far ahead of its time. Yet at the same moment, the ruins of Alph and the stories of Ekritiak pulled players backward into the deep past, reminding them that the world of Pokémon was layered with ancient mysteries. This contrast defined Crystal's identity. It was a game that shimmered like its namesake, both forward-looking and steeped in tradition, both polished refinement and experimental edge. The way the legendary beasts were presented highlighted this balance. Entei and Raikou remained roaming encounters, challenging players to track them down across the map. Suicune, however, became something more. Its repeated appearances created a rhythm, almost like a heartbeat running beneath the main story. Each sighting reinforced the sense that the player's journey was tied to something greater, as if destiny itself was guiding the way. The climactic encounter at the Tin Tower felt like the culmination of a pilgrimage, where myth and personal growth intersected in a single moment. This was one of the earliest examples of a Pokémon game weaving narrative progression around a specific legendary, foreshadowing future generations, where legendary figures became central to the story. Crystal's gym leaders also deserve attention for their refinements. While their rosters were similar to those in Gold and Silver, the developers tweaked move selections and strategies to ensure battles felt more dynamic. Whitney's infamous Miltank remained a stumbling block for many players, but even other leaders had their challenges sharpened. Claire, the final gym leader of Johto, maintained her reputation as a formidable dragon master, and her battle in Crystal carried the same weight as before, but with small adjustments that kept even seasoned players on their toes. These refinements made each victory feel earned, while ensuring that Crystal remained a distinct experience rather than a simple retread. The introduction of Chris as a playable character cannot be overstated. Her presence marked a milestone for representation, allowing girls to see themselves reflected in the role of protagonist. She carried a sporty design, bold and distinctive, with blue hair tied in pigtails that set her apart from later female trainers. Though she would eventually be replaced by Lyra in the remakes, Chris remains a symbol of Crystal's unique place in the series. For many, she was not just an avatar, but a sign that the world of Pokémon was opening its doors wider, making space for more players to see themselves in the adventure. Crystal also carried quirks in its post-game, small refinements that added variety for those who journeyed into Kanto after becoming champion. Trainers in Kanto carried slightly adjusted teams, reflecting the passage of time since the events of the original Red and Blue. These changes made revisiting Kanto feel fresh, while still maintaining the nostalgic echoes of the first generation. Walking through Vermilion, Cerulean, or Viridian carried the weight of history, but in Crystal, those towns felt just a little more alive, a little more polished, a little more connected to the grander narrative of Johto. The game's odd egg mechanic deserves revisiting as well, not only for its high shiny rate, but for what it symbolized. Eggs and breeding had been introduced in Gold and Silver, but Crystal emphasized them, making the concept of hatching a companion accessible to every player. Watching an egg crack open, revealing a baby species that carried both rarity and charm, reinforced the themes of growth and continuity that defined Johto. For many players, that egg became one of the most memorable parts of their journey, a small gift that tied them emotionally to their adventure. The visual presentation of Crystal carried countless small improvements, from the shimmering introduction with Suicune to the brief battle animations that gave creatures life. Everything about the game felt polished. These flourishes may seem modest today, but at the time they transformed how players saw their companions. A simple wing flap or tail twitch suggested personality, transforming battles into encounters with living beings rather than static icons. These details deepened immersion and set the stage for the more dynamic presentations of later generations. Even the music carried significance. The Battle Tower theme, unique to Crystal, hinted at ambition and progress, contrasting with the more traditional tunes of Johto. Suicune's themes emphasized grace and mystery, reinforcing its role as a guardian. The ruins of Alph carried eerie tones that heightened the sense of otherworldliness. Together, these compositions gave Crystal its own sonic identity, ensuring that it felt distinct within the broader Johto experience. Crystal's legacy also lies in how it refined the balance of encounters. Wild Pokémon were redistributed across routes, making exploration feel different even for veterans of Gold and Silver. Certain species appeared more frequently, while others shifted locations entirely. These adjustments encouraged players to explore anew, discovering surprises in familiar places. For completionists, these changes provided motivation to comb through every route, reinforcing the idea that each version of the game carried its own secrets. The story of Suicune also contributed to the sense of uniqueness. As a character defined by his devotion to Suicune, he embodied human obsession with myth. His determination added an emotional edge to the pursuit of the legendary, showing that legends were not only about creatures, but also about the people who believed in them. His presence enriched the narrative, adding depth and variety to the cast of characters who defined Johto. Taken together, these elements made Crystal more than just an enhanced edition. It was a shimmering variation that combined polish, experimentation, and storytelling. For many fans, it became the definitive way to experience Johto, offering both the comfort of familiarity and the excitement of discovery. It bridged the gap between tradition and innovation, proving that even small changes could carry immense weight. Another layer of Crystal's identity lies in how it brought subtle changes to Johto's geography and encounters, encouraging exploration even for players already familiar with Gold and Silver. Small adjustments to wild Pokémon locations made familiar routes feel different. For instance, some species were swapped to new areas, ensuring that even seasoned trainers had surprises waiting. These shifts reinforced the sense that Johto was alive, that the world was not frozen in place but flexible, adapting to new stories. Players combed through caves and fields, noticing differences that encouraged them to catch species they had previously overlooked. The inclusion of Suicune's storyline also reshaped how players experienced travel across the region. Where Gold and Silver had scattered the legendary beasts as purely roaming encounters, Crystal structured Suicune's appearances as set pieces. You would see the legendary at scenic spots, watching silently before vanishing once more. Each sighting reinforced a rhythm, tying exploration to a sense of pursuit and destiny. By the time the final encounter at the Tin Tower arrived, the anticipation felt earned, transforming what could have been a fleeting encounter into a climactic conclusion. This narrative design was an early experiment in blending exploration with story, and it paved the way for the more cinematic storytelling of later generations. Yusin's role in this journey amplified the sense of myth. His determination to uncover Suicune's secrets made him one of the first human characters whose entire story revolved around a legendary Pokémon. He was not a rival in the traditional sense, nor a villain, but a seeker, someone consumed by belief. His presence gave players another lens through which to view legends, showing how myths shape not only regions but individuals. This human side of myth would become a recurring theme in later generations, but Yusin's introduction in Crystal marked one of the earliest attempts to explore it in depth. Crystal also refined the atmosphere of Johto's most mysterious places. The ruins of Alph, already eerie in gold and silver, gained animated sequences that brought the Unknown's power to life. Solving the sliding puzzles revealed cryptic cutscenes, emphasizing that these ruins were not just optional side activities, but remnants of an ancient and powerful culture. The unsettling music and the cryptic shapes of the unknown combined to create one of the strangest atmospheres in the series. For many players, these sequences stood out as moments of awe and unease, hinting at forces far older than the world of trainers and battles. The presentation of Crystal leaned into these themes of mystery and grace. The opening sequence, which depicted Suicune dashing across the screen, was a striking departure from the static intros of earlier games. This cinematic touch signaled from the very beginning that this version carried a different identity. It was not only about battling through gyms and collecting badges, it was about pursuit, myth, and destiny. That brief animation became iconic, instantly setting Crystal apart from its predecessors and embedding itself in the memories of anyone who switched on the cartridge for the first time. Even the small addition of animated sprites in battle carried surprising weight. Though the animations were only a few frames long, they gave Pokémon a sense of personality. A bird flapping its wings, a creature leaning forward aggressively, or a tail flick suggested life in ways static images never could. These flourishes were modest, but they elevated the experience, hinting at the dynamic models that would one day define the series. For players in 2000, those animations felt magical, a small spark that made the creatures on their screen feel alive. The odd egg also added an important emotional touch. While breeding mechanics had been introduced in Gold and Silver, Crystal ensured that every player experienced the joy of hatching. Receiving the egg and walking until it cracked open created a sense of anticipation and wonder. The high odds of hatching a shiny made the moment even more memorable, giving many players their very first alternate colored companion. That sparkle at the moment of hatching became a story that players carried with them, a piece of magic that connected them to Crystal long after they put the cartridge away. Chris's presence as a protagonist was equally transformative. Her sporty design and distinctive look made her instantly recognizable, but more importantly, she represented choice. For the first time, players could select a female hero, allowing girls to see themselves reflected in the journey. The impact of this change cannot be overstated. Representation gave the adventure new meaning, ensuring that the Pokémon world felt more inclusive than ever. Although later games would refine and expand on female protagonists, Chris's introduction remains a milestone in the series' history. The battle tower on Route 40 also deserves close attention. While its scale was modest compared to the sprawling facilities of later generations, it represented the beginning of something important. By creating a structured challenge beyond the Elite Four, the battle tower encouraged players to think more strategically about their teams. Restrictions on certain species and the progression through increasingly difficult trainers foreshadowed the competitive focus that would later become integral to the series. For those who engaged with it, the Battle Tower added immense replay value, transforming Pokémon from a single adventure into an experience that could be tested endlessly. Another fascinating element of Crystal was its connection to real-world technology in Japan. The mobile system GB allowed features that international players could only dream about: trading, battling, receiving news updates, and participating in events through mobile phones sounded almost futuristic at the time. The ability to obtain Celebi through this system made it one of the earliest examples of event-based mythical distribution. While these features never left Japan, their very existence hinted at the future of the series, where online connectivity would become central. For players outside Japan, reading about these mysteries through magazines or early websites created a sense of longing, reinforcing the aura of Crystal as something special. Even the smaller refinements mattered. Trainer rosters were updated, wild encounters balanced, and move learn sets adjusted to make battles smoother. These subtle changes may have gone unnoticed by casual players, but they shaped the experience in ways that added polish and depth. For dedicated fans, discovering these differences was part of the fun, creating a sense of mastery that came from recognizing how Crystal diverged from its predecessors. Together, these layers of refinement, mystery, and innovation gave Crystal its unique place in the franchise. It was not just an enhanced edition. It was a shimmering variation that blended polish with experimentation, myth with modernity, representation with tradition. For those who experienced it, the game remains a beloved memory, a version that captured both the spirit of Johto and the promise of what the series would one day become. Crystal's identity shines most clearly when viewed as a bridge between eras. On one hand, it was the culmination of everything Gold and Silver had introduced, polishing Johto into a refined and memorable adventure. On the other, it was a preview of where the series was headed, experimenting with features and ideas that would later become cornerstones. This dual nature is what makes Crystal feel timeless, a game both rooted in its moment and reaching toward the future. The legendary beasts remain at the center of this feeling. Entei and Raikou roamed as before, challenging players to master the patience of tracking and pursuit. Yet Suicune's narrative focus gave the game an emotional anchor. Watching it appear across different locations created a sense of story that extended beyond badges and battles. It was not simply about completing a Pokédex. It was about being part of a myth unfolding in real time. This subtle storytelling elevated the adventure, giving Crystal a rhythm that set it apart from its predecessors. The refinement of lore extended beyond legendaries. The ruins of Alph deepened the aura of mystery, turning puzzles into glimpses of forgotten history. The cryptic Unknown, with their alphabetic forms, invited speculation that continues to this day. Were they guardians of ancient secrets, or remnants of a culture lost to time? Crystal did not provide answers, and that deliberate ambiguity gave the ruins a haunting permanence. Players left the area with questions rather than conclusions, ensuring that the ruins lingered in memory long after the journey moved on. Chris's role also reinforced Crystal's identity as a landmark in the franchise. For the first time, a female protagonist could step into the spotlight, breaking ground for inclusivity. Her design was practical yet striking, with blue hair and a red outfit that stood out from the muted tones of earlier trainers. She was not just a cosmetic change. She was a symbol of progress, proof that the series was growing alongside its audience. For girls who had long loved the franchise, seeing themselves represented was a moment of validation that made the adventure feel personal in a way it had not before. The Odd Egg event symbolized another kind of progress. By ensuring that every player could hatch a baby Pokémon, the developers guaranteed that the joy of hatching was universal. The high odds of encountering a shiny turned this event into one of the most memorable features of the game. For many, the Odd Egg was their first glimpse of alternate colored companions, a dazzling surprise that carried emotional weight. That sparkle, when it appeared, became a lifelong memory tied directly to Crystal's shimmering identity. Even the small addition of animated battle sprites transformed the feel of the game. Those short movements suggested life, turning battles into encounters with creatures that had personality. A slight wing flap, a twitch, or a head tilt was enough to make players imagine the rest. It was an innovation so small in technical terms, yet so profound in emotional effect. Looking back, these animations marked a step toward the dynamic models that would later define the series. In their time, they were magical flourishes that gave the world new energy. The Battle Tower expanded on this energy by introducing a new kind of challenge. Though modest, compared to the massive facilities of later generations, it represented the first experiment in structured post-game competition. The tower's restrictions and consecutive battles forced players to think differently about strategy, team composition, and endurance. For those who embraced it, the Battle Tower added immense replay value. It was the seed from which competitive battling as a culture would later grow, proving that Pokémon was not just about completing a journey, but about mastering a craft. International differences in Crystal also fueled fascination. The Japanese release, with its mobile system GB, allowed players to experience features that felt almost futuristic. Remote trading, battling, and news updates were astonishing in an era when handhelds were still limited by cartridges. Through mobile events made the mythical feel even more special, tied to moments of community and connection. For players outside Japan, hearing about these features through magazines and early internet forums created a sense of mystery. Crystal became not just a game but a legend of its own, with whispers of features few could ever experience firsthand. Even smaller details reinforced Crystal's distinctiveness. Trainer rosters were tweaked, wild encounters rebalanced, and small bits of dialogue refined. These adjustments made the world feel smoother and more polished, rewarding players who paid close attention. For many, replaying Crystal after Gold or Silver felt like revisiting a familiar home that had been quietly renovated. The layout was the same, but the details sparkled differently, making the journey fresh once more. The soundtrack added further polish. Suicune's themes emphasized its grace and mystery, while the eerie tones of the ruins of Alph heightened unease. The Battle Tower carried futuristic energy, foreshadowing the ambitions of later facilities. These compositions ensured that Crystal had its own sonic identity, distinct within Johto's broader soundscape. Listening to the music today evokes not only nostalgia, but the sense of refinement that defined the game. Taken together, these elements reveal why Crystal holds such a treasured place in memory. It was more than a bridge between Gold and Silver and the next generation. It was a statement that Pokémon could evolve through refinement, experimentation, and inclusivity. It polished the familiar, tested the new, and carried players deeper into a world where myth and modernity blended seamlessly. For those who experienced it, Crystal remains not just another version, but the definitive shimmer of Johto. The heart of Crystal beats strongest in its atmosphere, a feeling that blended nostalgia with discovery in equal measure. Returning, players recognize the familiar paths of Johto, yet subtle adjustments made every route worth revisiting. The placement of trainers, The refinement of dialogue and the careful pacing of encounters gave the impression that the world itself had been retuned for harmony. It was as though the region, like a living organism, had settled into balance after its first unveiling. This atmosphere carried a softness, a sense of reflection that distinguished Crystal from the bold leaps of other entries. This deepened sense of immersion extended into the mysteries of the world. The tower ruins became more than just puzzles. They symbolized a culture that had left behind fragments too cryptic for simple answers. The presence of letter-shaped beings tied directly into this sense of enigma, as if they were living glyphs carrying messages humanity had yet to decode. Their appearance in swarms of shifting forms reflected a haunting beauty, a quiet reminder that the Pokémon world was vast and unknowable. Crystal never broke that mystery, instead leaving players with the silence of unanswered questions. The narrative threads surrounding Suicune stitch this sense of mystery into the main journey. Unlike the roaming figures of Raikou and Entei, which retained their fleeting unpredictability, Suicune embodied patience and destiny. Its scripted appearances across the region provided rhythm, almost like chapters in a storybook. The involvement of the eccentric explorer added another layer, his pursuit reflecting humanity's obsession with capturing what is fleeting. Yet, despite his persistence, it was the player who earned the final meeting, reinforcing the idea that quiet observation and respect outlasted force. This was storytelling delivered not through lengthy dialogue, but through design, atmosphere, and pacing. The Odd Egg offered a different form of storytelling, one rooted in joy. Receiving the egg from the daycare couple tied together themes of tradition, family, and growth. Hatching it, especially when the result shimmered in an alternate hue, became a small miracle. The statistical generosity of the event meant that many children experienced the thrill of encountering a shiny without knowing the rarity. This accident of design carried profound emotional weight, ensuring that Crystal became synonymous with moments of wonder. For countless players, that single hatch became a memory more enduring than even the defeat of the Elite Four. Subtle polish appeared in trainer battles as well. Rival encounters carried refined teams and more pointed dialogue, marking the growth of a character who began as harsh and solitary. His eventual use of a friendship-evolving companion symbolized transformation, proof that even the most hardened individual could change when bonds deepened. This thematic undercurrent reflected the series' broader message. Growth was not just about strength, but about connection. Crystal made that theme clearer, layering it into the rival's journey so that his arc mirrored the player's own. Mechanically, the introduction of animated sprites cannot be overstated. Those small flourishes brought creatures to life in ways that words struggle to capture. A flick of wings, a tilt of a head, or a pulse of flame conveyed individuality more powerfully than static art ever could. For children who had long imagined their partners as alive within the screen, these movements confirmed the dream. In hindsight, the animations feel primitive compared to later eras, but in their time they were revolutionary, transforming the tone of every battle. The battle tower, modest though it was, carried immense symbolic weight. Positioned as a structure beyond the main narrative, it invited players to test themselves in a new arena. By limiting certain moves or creating consecutive gauntlets, it forced strategy over brute force. This experimentation laid the groundwork for the competitive future of the series, where mastery would come not just from leveling, but from synergy, patience, and planning. To step into the tower was to glimpse the future of Pokémon itself. Cultural differences in the Japanese version created another layer of fascination. The mobile connectivity system, ahead of its time, turned the game into a networked experience long before global Wi-Fi. Trading, battling, and even receiving event distributions through phone lines was revolutionary. The idea that a mythical could be obtained through such a system felt like magic, as though technology itself had become a bridge between myth and reality. For those outside Japan, these features became whispers carried across magazines and playground conversations, fueling a sense of longing that gave Crystal an almost mythical status. Dialogue refinements throughout the game added warmth. Shopkeepers, trainers, and even random townsfolk seemed to speak with slightly more nuance. Some lines offered humor, others small encouragements, and others hints at deeper lore. These touches reinforced the sense that Johto was a living place, inhabited by personalities rather than simple NPCs. The care in rewriting text proved that even the smallest details could elevate immersion. For players, it meant that returning to towns felt like revisiting acquaintances, deepening the illusion of a connected world. The music, too, cemented Crystal's aura. Subtle remixes of familiar tracks gave the game its own identity while preserving the charm of its predecessors. Suicune's theme shimmered with elegance, while the eerie tones of the ruins echoed with otherworldly weight. The Battle Tower theme pulsed with futuristic ambition, contrasting against the pastoral calm of roots and villages. Listening today evokes not only nostalgia, but a reminder of how soundscapes shape memory. In a game where pixels were simple and dialogue brief, it was music that painted emotion in vivid strokes. The post-game content offered another gift: continuity. The return to Kanto, though familiar, felt polished and complete in Crystal. Gyms carried refinements, and encounters with old champions tied threads together. Revisiting the region where it all began provided closure, a sense of cycle completing itself. For children who had started with red or blue, this return was more than nostalgia. It was a reunion with a world that had grown alongside them, reminding them that their journey was part of a larger tapestry. Looking back, Crystal's greatness lay not in dramatic reinvention, but in the shimmer of refinement. Every detail, from animated sprites to the storyline of a wandering legendary, from the odd egg to the mobile system, combined into a whole greater than the sum of its parts. It was a game that taught patience, rewarded curiosity, and encouraged connection. It was a reminder that sometimes progress is not loud or brash, but quiet and deliberate. For players drifting into sleep, that lesson mirrors life itself. Growth is not always about leaps, but about subtle changes that, over time, shine like crystal. One of the most fascinating aspects of Crystal is how it blurred the line between myth and mechanics. Where gold and silver had laid the foundation for Johto's history, Crystal breathed personality into its legends. Suicune's appearances across the region were more than scripted events. They were lessons in anticipation, teaching players that some encounters could not be forced, only awaited. This patience gave the game a rhythm distinct from its predecessors, a gentle reminder that timing was part of the adventure. By the time Suicune stood waiting atop the Tin Tower, the sense of culmination felt earned, not handed out. The Tin Tower itself embodied this philosophy. Rising above Ecruteak with sacred solemnity, it was less a dungeon and more a pilgrimage. Climbing its levels, hearing the soft chimes of its soundtrack, and sensing the weight of history in its walls, made the ascent feel spiritual. When Suicune appeared, it was not just a battle, but a ritual, a moment when the player stepped into a role larger than that of a simple trainer. Few encounters in the series have blended lore, design, and atmosphere as seamlessly as this. Crystal also demonstrated the power of refinement in smaller systems. The inclusion of time-based events, already present in gold and silver, received subtle improvements. The shading of backgrounds by time of day, the gentle transition of colors from morning to night, and the variation in encounter tables reinforced immersion. A creature caught at dusk felt different from one caught at noon, even if they shared species. The integration of daily and weekly events, such as the bug-catching contest or rematches with trainers, added life to the world. Crystal amplified these rhythms, reminding players that this was a living ecosystem rather than a static map. The game's treatment of rivalries also reflected growth. The Rivals arc, already powerful in gold and silver, gained further emphasis in Crystal. His bitterness softened not through sudden revelation, but through small demonstrations of change. His eventual use of a friendship-evolving Pokémon symbolized this arc with elegance, showing that even those hardened by anger could grow through connection. The rival's presence in Crystal felt more human, more nuanced, and that made his journey as memorable as the player's own. One of Crystal's quiet triumphs was its treatment of exploration. Routes remained familiar, but new encounters and small adjustments made them worth traversing again. The distribution of certain Pokémon shifted to balance the experience, ensuring that replaying did not feel redundant. Even areas such as Dark Cave or Mount Mortar carried tweaks that rewarded curiosity. For players who lingered, the game always seemed to offer something fresh, as though rewarding patience was woven into its design philosophy. The Odd Egg continued to embody this philosophy of patience and surprise. The daycare couple's simple gift carried the weight of possibility. Each step taken while it incubated felt like carrying hope, and the moment it hatched was electric. For many children, seeing a shiny burst forth from that egg became a story retold countless times in schoolyards and forums. Though the odds were higher than in other circumstances, the rarity was still great enough that the event carried tension. Would the hatch sparkle or remain ordinary? That uncertainty gave the egg mythic status in its own right. International differences expanded Crystal's mythology further. The Japanese version's mobile system GB turned handhelds into gateways for connection. Players could receive news, challenge opponents, and even obtain Celebi, all through a system that seemed impossibly advanced at the time. For those outside Japan, these features became half-heard rumors, fueling myths almost as powerful as the in-game legends. Stories of Celebi events or mysterious mobile-exclusive content spread across playgrounds, elevating Crystal into a game that felt not just rare, but magical. Animated sprites elevated ordinary battles into spectacles. Though brief and limited, these animations breathed life into partners. A flick of wings, a wag of a tail, a pulse of fire or ice, each motion deepened immersion. It was no longer necessary to imagine the creatures shifting. The screen itself confirmed their vitality. This edition, modest in scope, marked a step forward in the portrayal of Pokémon as living beings. It set expectations for future generations, where dynamism would become the standard. The Battle Tower, while simple, introduced an entirely new dimension of play. Its existence encouraged players to think beyond the main quest, to refine teams and strategies for endurance. For many, it was their first taste of competitive battling, a structured environment where casual experimentation gave way to careful planning. Though later towers and facilities would expand dramatically, the seed planted here was crucial. Crystal hinted that Pokemon could be more than a single journey, it could be a lifelong pursuit of mastery. Dialogue throughout the game reinforced its polish. Trainers spoke with slightly more depth, shopkeepers offered subtle encouragements, and NPCs hinted at lore with greater clarity. These touches enriched the world, turning what might have been filler text into small glimpses of culture. Towns felt more alive, populated by individuals rather than placeholders. The decision to refine language reflected Game Freak's awareness that immersion was built not only on mechanics, but on personality. The soundtrack, already iconic in Johto, gained new highlights in Crystal. Suicune's theme shimmered with grace, its flowing notes evoking water and wind. The Battle Tower theme pulsed with ambition, hinting at the competitive futures that awaited. Even familiar tracks seemed sharpened, as if polished to match the crystalline identity of the game. For players, music became inseparable from memory. Hearing those themes decades later still conjures the exact emotions felt when first exploring the region. Crystal's legacy lies in how it unified all these threads. It was not only a refinement of mechanics or a retelling of Johto's story, it was a meditation on patience, mystery, and connection. Through Suicune's pursuit, through the odd egg's shimmer, through the gentle pacing of day and night, Crystal asked players to slow down and savor the world. In doing so, it captured something timeless, the idea that games can be more than systems, that they can be experiences designed to linger in memory like dreams. Crystal's refinement extended even to the way trainers engaged with one another. The rematch system, powered through phone calls, gave the sense that rivals and acquaintances were more than fleeting encounters. A bug catcher who once fell easily might call again, boasting that his team had grown stronger. A fisher who once seemed forgettable might return, determined to prove himself. These small touches created continuity, a reminder that the world of Pokémon was not static, but ever-changing. By linking mechanics to the rhythms of daily life, Crystal captured a sense of growth that mirrored the player's own. Seasonal events also played a larger role. The bug-catching contest, held on specific days, gave players reason to return to the national park regularly. The idea of competing, not just for victory, but for scoring based on rarity and condition, reflected a more complex approach to competition. It was not simply about defeating an opponent, but about showcasing patience and strategy in capturing a living creature. For many children, the contest became a ritual, a highlight of weekly play that extended beyond the main narrative. Crystal also deepened the connection between Johto and Kanto. By polishing transitions and adding dialogue, the game smoothed the bridge between the two regions. Stepping back into Kanto felt less like a repeat and more like revisiting an old friend who had changed with time. Gym leaders seemed seasoned, landscapes carried subtle differences, and the sense of legacy grew stronger. This return emphasized the idea that the world of Pokémon was continuous, where past and present intertwined. The introduction of move tutors also added layers of strategy. By offering special techniques outside of leveling, Crystal rewarded curiosity and planning. These tutors became an early glimpse of the customization that would later define advanced training. For dedicated players, these moves felt like hidden treasures, proof that exploration could lead to power beyond what was obvious. The system tied gameplay to discovery in elegant fashion, ensuring that growth came from attentiveness as much as from grinding. The role of myth and folklore in Johto found new resonance in Crystal. Towers, ruins, and shrines dotted the land, hinting at civilizations that revered the creatures players now trained. This blending of history and fantasy grounded the world in cultural richness. Suicune's role as a wandering guardian embodied this reverence, appearing not as a prize, but as a symbol of nature's resilience. By tying mechanics to mythology, Crystal reminded players that Pokémon were more than tools for battle. They were beings woven into the fabric of a living culture. Even the Pokédex carried layers of intrigue. Entries in Crystal often differed slightly from their gold and silver counterparts, offering fresh lore. Descriptions hinted at behavior, habitats, and histories that expanded understanding of familiar creatures. For players who compared versions, these differences became points of fascination, sparking discussions and speculation. The subtlety of these adjustments proved that even text could reshape perception, enriching the universe without needing new mechanics. The choice of starter Pokémon, always symbolic, carried deeper resonance in Crystal. Their final evolutions reflected the themes of Johto: patience, energy, and adaptability. The journey from a small companion to a fully evolved partner embodied growth not only in strength, but in philosophy. For many players, the bond with that first choice became inseparable from their memory of the game itself. Crystal emphasized this connection by refining animations and dialogue that acknowledged the partnership. It was a quiet but meaningful reinforcement of the bond at the heart of the series. Crystal also emphasized the role of family and community. The presence of the player's mother, saving money and providing items, remained a grounding touch. NPCs across towns reflected cultural values, from traditions tied to towers to modern ambitions embodied by structures like the Battle Tower. These contrasts reflected the balance between heritage and progress, mirroring real-world tensions in Japan during the late 1990s. The game became not only a fantasy adventure, but a cultural artifact, preserving echoes of its time. The legendary beasts embodied this duality of tradition and progress. They were ancient symbols, reborn through the burned tower's tragedy, yet their presence was reshaped by Crystal's narrative focus. Raikou and Entei represented the unpredictability of nature, wandering untamed. Suicune, by contrast, reflected destiny and patience, waiting for the right moment to connect. Together, they embodied a philosophy that balance was achieved not through control, but through respect. Players who grasped this lesson understood that victory in Crystal was never just about strength, it was about harmony. Even small mechanics, such as daycare breeding, carried symbolic weight. By allowing offspring to inherit traits from parents, the game reinforced themes of continuity and legacy. Egg moves hinted at knowledge passed between generations, transforming mechanics into metaphors. For children who discovered these features by accident, the sense of uncovering a hidden truth was profound. For dedicated trainers, it opened a world of possibilities, laying the foundation for competitive strategies that would shape the series' future. Graphically, Crystal polished Johto into brilliance. Palettes shimmered more vividly, tiles carried sharper contrasts, and sprites gleamed with subtle animations. This vibrancy made the world feel alive, even on the small screen of the Game Boy Color. Nighttime walks through Ecruteak glowed with mystery, while mornings in Newbark carried softness. The improved visuals elevated the emotional tone, ensuring that even routine travel carried atmosphere. The legacy of Crystal lies in how it layered all of these elements into a seamless whole. It did not reinvent Pokémon, but it redefined how refinement could shine. Every feature, from the rematch calls to the mobile connectivity, from the odd egg to the legendary beasts, served to polish the experience into something crystalline. For players drifting into sleep, the message was clear. Greatness is not always loud. Sometimes it sparkles quietly, reflecting light in ways that only patience and attention can reveal. Crystal's brilliance becomes most apparent when reflecting on its role in shaping the future of the series. It was more than a polished retelling of Johto's story. It was a prototype of possibilities. Features that seemed small at the time would echo through generations, while its emphasis on refinement proved that Pokemon could evolve through subtlety as much as through innovation. The inclusion of a female protagonist marked one of these turning points. Chris's presence validated players who had long wanted representation, transforming the journey into something more inclusive. Her design balanced practicality with vibrancy, ensuring she felt like a character who belonged both to the world and to the players who guided her. That choice opened doors for every installment to follow, establishing a precedent that trainers could reflect a wider range of identities. The Odd Egg continued this sense of progress. By granting every player the chance to hatch a baby Pokemon, it emphasized care, patience, and surprise as central parts of the experience. When a shiny emerged from that egg, it became more than a lucky roll of code. It was a story that players carried with them. That moment reinforced the theme of wonder that defined Crystal, proof that even the smallest gifts could become legends in memory. The legendary beasts also embodied this philosophy of storytelling through mechanics. Raikou and Entei retained their roaming unpredictability, while Suicune's scripted path turned myth into narrative. Following it across the region created anticipation, a feeling that destiny was unfolding with each step. When the pursuit culminated at the Tin Tower, the encounter felt earned. It was less a battle of trainer versus beast and more a ritual of acknowledgement, where patience was rewarded with trust. Few Pokemon moments have captured myth so elegantly. Environmental storytelling deepened the journey further. The ruins scattered across Johto whispered of civilizations lost to time. The letter-shaped beings tied to those ruins reinforced the enigma, leaving players to interpret their purpose. The silence of unanswered questions gave the ruins a weight that lingered, reminding players that some mysteries were meant to be felt rather than solved. This restraint became one of Crystal's strengths, turning ambiguity into atmosphere. The Battle Tower symbolized another frontier. Modest compared to later facilities, it nevertheless introduced the concept